Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the 212 Startup Series. On today's show, we have Jonny Price, VP of Fundraising at Wefunder. Wefunder is the world's largest regulation crowdfunding platform, and Jonny kicks off the show by telling us how crowdfunding can be a great way for founders to build stronger relationships and ties with their community. He then fills us in on the one piece of advice every Reg CF company needs to hear, and we wrap up the show with a dive into Wefunder's core values around inclusivity and expanding access to the startup ecosystem, and we discuss how those are values shared by 212. Boom, 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 boom. All right, we've got Jonny Price, a good friend of Rajesh and mine. Worked with Jonny quite a bit, who he's working with Wefunder. Jonny, want to first kick it off before we get into your personal story? Tell us a little bit about Wefunder.
Yeah, great to be here, guys. Thanks for having me. Wefunder is a platform that lets anyone invest in startups, not just rich people. Startup founders can raise up to $5 million per year from accredited investors, but also now unaccredited investors. So their customers, their community members, we roll all those investors up to one line on the cap table. And so the idea is that as well as raising from VCs and angels, you can now delight your customers, engage your community members by bringing them on as investors in your startup.
Fantastic. And tell us about about your backstory. How'd you get to Wefunder, and what's your role at Wefunder?
Yeah, I grew up in the UK. I started my career in management consulting for my sins. So if you guys ever need, a PowerPoint deck meticulously formatted, I'm your guy. I did that for 6 years. Partway through that, I did a sabbatical at this nonprofit called Kiva.org in San Francisco. And I met the girl who's now my wife there. She's who brought me back permanently to San Francisco in 2010. And then a year after that, I joined Kiva full time. So I launched their US team. So Kiva is a nonprofit, it was crowdfunding microloans for entrepreneurs around the world, mostly in the developing world, Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, etc. But the team I was leading was bringing that model to support entrepreneurs in the US. So I led that team for 7 years. We made 5,000 microloans to US small businesses, 25 million in capital. It was super small, $5,000 per loan. And then in early 2018, I stepped away from that and came to join Wefunder. And I've been running our business development team for the last 4 years. It's been a very, very fun and exciting ride. We have a just incredible group of people over there, really, really fun culture. Head office is in San Francisco. About a year and a half ago, I moved with my wife and now 3 kids to Nashville, Tennessee, where I'm calling you from today. So we're trying to grow the Wefunder team here. Now we have 8 people in an office, this house I'm speaking to you from. And we're seeing some really cool pickup of the Wefunder model among founders here in Nashville now as well. So that's the Jonny Price life story in 60 seconds.
That's awesome, man. So it's a lot of food, music, and Wefunder. That's what is happening in Nashville.
Exactly, Music City. Also, bachelorette parties. I think that's the number one thing that Nashville is known for now is bachelorette parties, cruising up and down Broadway. But yeah, some country music as well, and some community rounds as we're rebranding equity crowdfunding as.
Oh, tell us more about that.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's one of the most powerful examples I've ever seen of how tweaking a couple of words can totally shift perception of something in a really positive and awesome way. So, Wefunder uses this exemption called regulation crowdfunding, which you guys know a lot about. So normally when a startup's raising capital, they're raising on Regulation D, they're raising from accredited investors, they're usually privately soliciting investors. And with regulation crowdfunding, which is this new law that was rolled out by the SEC in 2016, you can do 2 pretty interesting things. Firstly, you can raise from unaccredited as well as accredited investors. And then secondly, you can publicly promote the offering. And so, it's called regulation crowdfunding. Like it's always been called equity crowdfunding, investment crowdfunding. But there's 2 problems with crowdfunding. One, whenever anyone says crowdfunding, you think of Kickstarter. And then 2, which is kind of perks-based crowdfunding, whereas this is investment. So it's quite a different thing, but people just immediately think of Kickstarter. And the second thing is like, who wants to raise from a crowd? You don't really want to raise from a crowd. It's kind of impersonal. Whereas if you say, you raise a friends and family round, you raise an angel round from angels, you raise a community round from your community. Show me one startup founder that doesn't want to build stronger relationships and ties with their community. Everyone's trying to build stronger community, right? There's community offices now and people kind of dedicated to building ties among your community of users and customers. And so this is like, for me, I'm pretty biased, obviously, but this concept now of running a community round on WeFunder, allowing your community members to invest in you, um, be on the cap table, not technically on the cap table because we use an SPV to make it one line on the cap table, but to be owners in your startup. Could there possibly be a better way of building, engagement among your community? Could there possibly be a better way of delighting your customers than by letting them invest as an owner of your startup? That is going to drive their net promoter score through the roof. They're going to become like an even more, passionate evangelist for your brand. They're not going to churn. They're going to have a higher LTV, higher share of wallet on your startup, your product. So we're kind of trying to reposition it as, away from equity crowdfunding and towards running a community round. And when we say a community round, for me, this is like it. Sometimes it's seen as like a kind of either or versus conventional capital, right? So either you do venture or you do crowdfunding. What we're trying to do is to say no, do both. VCs add a lot of value, can take a board seat, give you a ton of great advice and connections, network, etc. But also, it's going to do good things for your business if you can recruit 1,000 customers as investors. So do both. Maybe get the VC to lead the round, get that signal. They set the terms, and so there's kind of no concerns around like negative signal. And then also allow your customers, allow your community to participate in a community round as part of every round, right? From friends and family, pre-seed, seed, Series A. Mercury Bank just raised a 120 million Series B from Andreessen Horowitz and Co. 2, and then opened up $5 million to their customers. They filled it out in 5 hours. We would have loved to allow our Wefunder community to invest, but they were like, no, we just want our existing customers to invest. They have 40,000 startup founder customers, filled out that $5 million in a few hours. So more and more we're seeing founders that like, it's not really even about raising the money. They're very well easily funded by VCs, but it's just about, well, we actually think this is going to benefit our business to let our customers and community invest in us.
So that's interesting. So does that, let's say a company is building for enterprises.
Yep.
They may not have a large community. Even for SMBs, they may not have a large community, but mainly for a B2C type companies, that makes a lot of sense. Like, what do you
Yeah.
see is a disconnect there?
Yeah, certainly. I think as B2C is probably in the sweet spot, right? I mean, Mercury's customers are startup founders, right? So I think if your customers are startups, then I think that is just the absolute sweet spot because startup founders are really interested in this kind of thing and also probably not accredited. So I think that's like the sweet spot. We have a company launching soon that we're really excited about. Their customers are engineers. So I think that's another great example. And, sometimes it might be like, someone who works at this enterprise customer that you're trying to target can invest, and then maybe they can help make an intro and get you connected to the person at their company that's going to make the decision, right? Or like there's this kind of, I'm going to butcher the acronym B2C to B. I think it's called sales model, right? Of like you look at like a Dropbox or a Slack where it's like, okay, you're signing up kind of individual users and then they can like get their company and their enterprise to adopt the product. And so even for like kind of enterprise facing B2B companies, I think there's a real kind of application and value. I do think the sweet spot nevertheless is, companies that have a mass audience.
Yep, yep. And I think also it also brings some diligence into the thought process. It's very interesting what you just described. So today, a lot of the founders, what I've seen is they just try to go keep building, and not put stuff in front of customers. But now you're basically telling them, no, build something really quick, get some traction, get community involved, get them to know about your product, and keep building. And at some point, you have enough of them, go raise your 50K, right, through your crowdfunding, and then use that capital to go raise your next 200K at a higher valuation. So I think it's a very interesting concept that should be trained among founders and make them think like that. So it's fascinating what you do.
And it's growing. So Wefunder grew by about 4x in the last 12 months or so. We have some really exciting companies that are about to launch that I think is going to accelerate that growth in the coming months.
Is that number of raises or total amount raised?
Both, actually. So about a year ago, the SEC improved the laws significantly with respect to what we do, this regulation crowdfunding exemption, on both ends. So on one end, they increased the maximum amount that companies could raise. It used to be 1 million, now it's 5 million. So then you have companies like Wefunder or Levels saying, oh, wow, this is now kind of worth my while and this is interesting. And so that's kind of increasing the average raise amount. But then you also have this law change called testing the waters, where kind of 2 years ago, before you launched a Wefunder round, you had to do weeks of preparation, legal documents, financials, and file this legal paperwork with the SEC, a Form C, before you could start fundraising. And now you can launch and test in the waters we say on the Wefunder website, you can start fundraising in 15 minutes. And so that then means that it's much easier for kind of smaller, earlier stage companies to raise. And so that's the kind of downward pressure on the average raise number. And so, the average raise is actually held pretty constant at about $400,000. And we have some more kind of larger campaigns, but also a long tail of smaller campaigns. So yeah, both number of campaigns that we're launching, closing, and investment volume roughly 4x over the last 12 months or so.
What's the biggest piece of advice you give to companies that are raising on Wefunder?
I think I'm gonna kind of cop out here and say it really does depend, right? So probably the number one most common advice is like, hey, this isn't like put it up on Wefunder and watch the $1 million roll in, right? Fundraising is hard. You guys know, you've seen a lot of companies fundraise. You've been kind of had experience yourself. Like fundraising is hard. It's oftentimes a full-time job of a founder for multiple months. It's like maybe hundreds of meetings, hundreds of no's. Like however you're fundraising, it's usually hard. And it's not like Wefunder is a silver bullet that kind of makes that magically easy. For some companies it is. So for Mercury, it's launch, send an email to customers, watch $5 million roll in 5 hours. Like Wefunder, we have hundreds of, actually 1.4 million registered users. We raised 5 million on our own platform last year because trying to eat our own dog feed, right? And so for us, same thing. We push button, get $5 million. It's very easy. So again, it does depend on the situation. But for most companies, this isn't going to make raising $1 million like super easy, but it will make it easier. Because now you can raise from unaccredited investors as well as accredited investors, 100% of the population versus 8% of the population. Now you can publicly promote on social, in an email blast. You can get in front of Wefunder investors. Typically, our investors bring about a third of the round. So it's like if you as a founder can bring $500,000 from your own outreach and promotion marketing, then you might expect our investors to bring $250K. And that's $250K that just straight up like you wouldn't have got without Wefunder, right? So I think we make it easier for founders to raise, but still, you gotta hustle, you gotta work hard, you gotta take the meetings, you gotta pitch, you gotta send the emails, follow ups. I say kind of treat investors like a CRM, right? You kind of have this target list, and then you're kind of populating it and kind of managing that funnel. So it takes work to make it work.
It seems kind of like. Yeah. Oh, go forward, Josh.
Sorry. So I just want to touch upon that the testing the water piece that you talked about. That's a lot of the question that I get asked by a lot of the founders coming to our platform. Just to clarify, since March 15th of last year, founders can now solicit fundraising publicly without actually having filled all the paperwork.
That's
That
right.
is the real cusp of that.
Yeah, exactly right. You can now start fundraising, put together a profile page on Wefunder, and start sharing it around in this testing the waters mode in 15 minutes.
Okay. That,
It's really
that,
easy. And then, to be clear, before you close on the money, you still need to file the Form C.
sure,
So you
sure.
still need the financials, you still need the legal disclosures, but now you can parallel process that with the fundraising. And so Mercury raised $5 million, Levels, another Andreessen Horowitz backed company that ran a community round with us for $5 million recently. Same thing. They did that in testing the waters. Then they filed the Form C with the SEC. Then they closed on the money.
Yeah, that's super important. Sorry, Dustin. Go ahead.
Oh no, I just kind of make it thinking. I this analogy popped in my head. It kind of what you're talking about with respect to community reminds me a lot of things I'm seeing in the NFT space. And the NFT value, a lot of that comes from community value. If you're, you can create the most beautiful, interesting, like NFT, virtual, AR, holographic, whatever. But if you put it out in the void and no one is listening, then it's pretty much worthless. But if you're Tom Brady or Tiger Woods and you issue like some exclusive NFT, you just, I logged in to buy this Tiger Woods NFT, and there was like 12 of them, and I was like 27,000th in line, and like it's just like, okay, well, they just put their hand out. And so it does seem like I'm happy to see that the value prop of Reg CF is starting to clarify around community, because I do think there were some misconceptions early about what it was. And I think you're right, a lot of founders just thought it was like a cheat code for getting money, and it really need to think of it more holistically around like how can this like fit in your business, just the same way you might like you want to be pretty sure like some like crypto or NFT thing like makes sense for you and your
Yeah,
business.
I will say and just on the Web3 thing, our CTO said the other day a sentence that I really like WeFunder is Web3 without the crypto. But a lot of the principles of
Yeah.
Web3, right, around kind of
Hmm.
community ownership and stakeholder
Hmm.
engagement, I think are very relevant for this concept of community round. It's just we're doing it with regular safes or convertible notes or regular investment structures as opposed to tokens or anything kind of crypto related. And the only thing I kind of just pick up on what you just said is, yeah, the value proposition is, I just think it's hard to argue, right? Like it's a pretty awesome way to delight your customers to let them invest in your startup. It's like hard. I'm talking to VCs, right? And the kind of, if I'm being like, if I'm poking the bear a little bit, then it's like, VC is to WeFunder as Hilton Hotels is to Airbnb, right? Where WeFunder is the kind of democratic platform. And so, kind of even in that kind of confrontational frame. And like I said before, we're not anti-VC. I think the best is to do both, right? But even in that confrontational frame, like I'm talking to more and more VCs now and pitching like, hey, you should send us your portfolio companies. This will accelerate their growth. And it's like, I'm not getting that much pushback. So I think that message is like, it's just kind of, I don't know, I think it's kind of hard to argue with. But there is another really important use case for WeFunder as well, which is that we do and we want to help founders that might be struggling to raise that capital, right? And so, and there might be good reasons why founders are struggling to raise capital because, they need to make more progress on the product and more traction before they kind of, earn money from investors. But I mean, I would argue there's a lot of bad reasons that founders struggle to raise capital as well. So right now, as you guys probably know, less than 3% of VC goes to female-only founding teams versus 80% to male-only founding teams. 1% of VC dollars last year went to black founders. 77% goes to 3 states, California, New York, and Massachusetts. And so you can argue it, but I would come down on the side of probably some of that is driven by, systematic kind of discrimination and bias in decision making from a lot of kind of white men that are controlling the purse strings in Silicon Valley, New York, and Boston. And so part of what we're trying to do at WeFunder is, okay, if we can democratize the decision makers, if we can let anyone be an angel investor, then hopefully we can level the playing field a little bit and get more capital flowing to women of color in Tennessee, where I am, or the Heartland. And so anyway, the point is like there's a huge value proposition of Wefunder for founders that we can actually make it easier for you to raise capital. We're not going to kind of move away from that. But yeah, the ideal is where there's both, right? Where or even when there's only the community piece, where it's like Mercury and Lovers, like we don't need the capital. This isn't about the capital. This is about customer and community engagement.
Well, the two use cases, in the first use case where you're going after those strong community rounds, you're also pulling in network effects of investors in the platform. And I know that you're sort of de-emphasizing some of the, hey, show up and, there's money here. But, that bigger that network gets,
Totally.
the more powerful it'll be. And, I heard that do you know what the ratio is of people that invest a second time in crowdfunding? Like how frequently do
I
people
don't know on other
reinvest?
platforms. On WeFunder, about 25% to date of investors have made two or more investments. So the numbers are 1.4 million registered users, three of whom 300,000 have made an investment, one investment, of whom 75,000 have made two or more investments. And then there's a concentration curve, and there's like some guys. This guy Dilraj, he's awesome, and he's made like hundreds of investments. It's really, really cool. I chatted with him the other day. And so, over time, we hope that we can get that percentage of investors that have made two or more investments up, right? As we have more liquidity of startup founders, like, okay, those 225,000 investors have only made one investment. There's probably not a startup that's like in a sector they're interested in their hometown, like that's fundraising on WeFunder right now. But imagine if there's like a restaurant that's opening up down the street from them, and we can send them an email and say, hey, you're a WeFunder investor. Check out this restaurant down the street from you. If you invest $100, then you get, a free glass of wine every time you go into the restaurant. That might be what gets them to come back a second time, and then they kind of get habituated. And then, so over time, I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to increase the kind of engagement and the activity of investors on the platform. But yeah, right now it's just 25% that have made two or more investments.
And are these numbers also inclusive of repeat investing in the same company?
Yeah, that would be including that's just the number of investments they've made. So even if that's a second investment in the same
I
company, it would
see.
be included in that.
Got it.
Repeat rounds are a pretty small percentage of our total though, so that probably is a pretty small factor.
I see. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing? I know that March 15th last year was very important, but
Hmm.
are there still things that are broken that you like regulations to fix?
I don't I don't know if I would go so far as to say this should be changed. But the biggest kind of impediment to our growth on the founder side now, and really for us, like the founder side drives the investor side. So if we get really, really awesome companies on WeFunder, then the investor side kind of takes care of itself, right? If we give retail investors the chance to invest on the same terms as Andreessen Horowitz in like this company that's like, going through the gears, then shouldn't be a problem for us to fund that company. So the real question is, can we get awesome founders on the platform? And the March 2021 rule changes, the 5 million caps, the SPVs to roll investors to one line on the cap table, the testing the orders to let companies launch very quickly, were great. Huge steps forward. The one thing that sometimes founders will be reluctant to go ahead with a community round right now is that you need to share financials publicly. So, uh, 2 years of financials, if you're incorporated more recently than that, then going back to the incorporation date of the company. And those financials need to be kind of publicly visible. Some founders are reluctant for whatever reason for that information to be out there in the public domain, in which case that's a legal requirement from the SEC.
Yep.
Would I change that? I don't know. I think the reason the SEC has that for Reg CF and they don't have it for Regulation D is that it's, retail investors, they have kind of less money to lose. And so the reason this was illegal for 80 years for unaccredited investors to invest in startups is because, investor protection. And so to have that financial information kind of transparently available, I think there's some advantages there. But certainly that is a bit of a break on growth. But obviously there's like a lot of founders, and I think an increasing number of founders who are, building in public and very, very happy for financials to be transparent. And certainly, we did it ourselves. We don't care if our competitors see our numbers. We just focus on executing and, kind of
Yep.
focusing on our own game. And so it's not too much of a break, but that's probably the one outstanding thing that I would say is where some it's a deal breaker for some folks.
Yeah, and I also know that there are some rules that allow companies to file another form to say that, okay, we'll stop making some of this disclosures going forward. Isn't that part of the CF rules as well?
Yeah, so that you need to do one annual report the year after you raise as well. So it's
Yep.
one filing with the raise itself, and then one annual report a year later.
Yep. Yep. Cool. What can you tell us about the SPV side of it? That's something that we've been kind of drilling into recently. And I know that Wefunder does an amazing job of making it available at no cost to the founder. And what is your plan going forward? Is that
Yeah. So SPV, special purpose vehicle, is the way that we roll up the individual investors to one line on the company's cap table. This was something the ability to use SPVs for regulation crowdfunding was something that the SEC unlocked as part of these rule changes. And so yeah, if you raise $1 million, the average investment on WeFunder is $1,000. So if you raise $1 million from 1,000 customers at $1,000 each, then it's just one SPV on your cap table, WeFunder LLC, and whatever the name is. And yeah, we've built that technology in house. It's one of the things that has always differentiated us at WeFunder is we build a lot of the tech in-house versus outsourcing to third parties, and that then gives us a cost advantage. Our standard fees are 7.5%, and so if you're paying kind of 2 or even 3% for the management of that to a third party, that's like a huge kind of component of the cost. And so having built that in house, allows us to kind of roll that into our standard fees. So there's no additional cost for founders to use that SPV, and we administer that in perpetuity.
Got it. And then you said the minimum is 1,000 to be part of the SPV.
The minimum investment on WeFunder is $100. Founders can
Yep.
set it up to $1,000 if they want, but most founders, going back to the community engagement thing, the reason they're raising on WeFunder is they want more of their customers, more of their community to be a part of this round, and also like it's not just existing community engagement, right? But it's also new customer acquisition. So you
Yeah.
get more kind of WeFunder investors and more kind of new customers if you lower the minimum investment amount. So most companies are going with $100 minimum, and yeah, all of the investors can be rolled into the SPV. If there's an angel investor, let's say, an accredited investor that wants to be carved out separately from the SPV, then we can do that. If the founder and the investor agree, we can give them their own line in the cap table. But the default is that everyone's rolled into the SPV.
Yeah, and one challenge I found with one of our customers was I don't know if it's a Wefunder company, but they raised on a convertible note, and the investments came across 6 months, right? So they had $100 or $200, whatever, coming in different dates, and there was an interest component that had to be calculated for each of these investors, uh, and that was a problem for them because it didn't accurately reflect what that interest was just because investments came on different days.
Hmm.
Do you hear that problem at all?
I've never heard of that problem before. That's probably one I would go to our GC for his wisdom on that one. I would imagine it would be based on when the contract is executed, and those investment contracts are typically executed kind of at the same day, even if the money came out of escrow, at different times along the course of the raise. But yeah, that's an interesting one I haven't come across yet.
Yeah, so that use case basically led us to go build something different in our product line as well. So we can now collapse all the, for example, Wefunder investors on a convertible note into a single line. It's basically synthetic representation. But within that representation, we can track all these 500 investors that came at different days, and the interest is accurately calculated based on the date that they
That's
came in.
cool.
That was a requirement for this customer. And then from a representation standpoint, we show them as a single line on the cap table. They can always expand that to see, okay, all the 500 or 1,000 investors that was part of that.
That's cool.
That's a real value proposition that we offered this particular customer because he needed that to accurately reflect
That's awesome.
what he did.
Yeah, sometimes because there's you got VCs that are asking you for this one line item because they don't want the investors on the cap table because the VCs are worried about sort of getting bothered by them, or worried that they might have some kind of like voting stake. And so sometimes it makes sense to stick them in the SPV, stick people in SPV. Often it does come at the cost of some of their voting rights, or maybe I've got that wrong. I know that there are some nuances in the new SPV bill. Was the rule that, hey, we can have SPVs, but it has to look just like these people on the cap table. So even if they're on the SPV, they get voting rights just like everybody on the cap table.
We actually, the way
Here?
we've structured it, I think is like pretty elegant, which is that we have a lead investor who and hopefully that's like an awesome angel investor, right? That like has a ton of credibility and has a network and an audience, and is investing a decent amount. Maybe it's 5% of the Wefunder round, and that amount is a signal that other investors can look at and kind of get behind. And so that lead investor is the one who casts the votes for the individual investors in the SPV. So, rather than kind of the founder having to collect 1,000 signatures from $100 retail investors, they just collect one signature from the lead investor. But that lead investor is then representing the interests of the investors. So it's kind of nice from an investor protection perspective.
Gotcha. So the founders just have to interface with one person.
Right.
Now let's think about, okay, so founders have raised some cash. They've created this SPV. Sidebar, one last thought on SPV is, if you are getting cap table management software, the competitors all like pierce through that. So although it's one line item, if they're charging by how many people are on your cap table and there's 500 people in there, you're going to get a bill from them as if you have 500 folks on your cap table. And I know that's one of the reasons that we've had a good working relationship, is because we're much more inclusive and crowdfunding friendly, and that we charge a flat fixed fee. So just want to drop that in there while we're on the topic. But moving past SPVs, so you've raised the capital, you've got your community engaged, they wrote you the check. Can you give us some examples of companies that have done a good job of leveraging that community? After they've raised, they've got the money. Any specific companies or brands that come to mind that did well post?
Yeah. So many examples. I mean, different sectors as well. So Atom Limbs is a company that's live right now. They're making a mind-controlled bionic arm. Really cool, just like better product for amputees. And so we actually interviewed Tyler for our podcast the other day. And they don't have the product in market yet, but they're doing an awesome job of building kind of engagement among that community. And then you have like Mercury is the example that they're building a bank for startups, and so if they loved like engaging their customers. Imad, their founder, has talked about these are his favorite investors. Are his customers. And I was, just talking to a CPG company on our podcast earlier today. Kelsey from Dope, she actually took out a revenue share loan with us back in 2018, paid it off. and she was talking about how her investors, she did a debt raise. Her investors actually, some of her investors went on to do follow-on equity investments in her, and she's talking about how they've been her biggest kind of brand ambassadors. Just kind of really engaging on social, sharing all the kind of updates she's putting out there, and super loyal customers as well. I did a case study one time on this other CPG company, who they sold kind of direct consumer online, and they anonymized but then shared their sales data with me, and so I was able to do this analysis of how, okay, when Wefunder investors invested a lot, they acquired a lot of new customers, people that weren't previously customers, then they invested in the Wefunder round, then they became customers. And then also I looked at, okay, the existing customers. If you looked at existing customers who are spending a similar amount per month, and you cut it by existing customers who invest in them, and then existing customers who don't invest in them, the ones who invested went on to have spend way more, kind of higher LTV, lower churn in the months and years following the Wefunder round. So that's the one kind of data-driven case study we have. Have had many anecdotal stories of founders saying, yeah, like all these awesome things came because our customers and community members invested in our community round. That's the one kind of data-driven case study we have. We can drop it in the show notes, as they say.
Sure, fantastic.
So for companies coming to Wefunder, you say, okay, launch in 15 minutes, so that's great. But do you have a recommendation for, okay, make sure you have $20,000 in your bank and keep that aside for marketing spend or whatever it is? So do you have a threshold or a sweet spot for when you want these founders to get on your platform?
Yeah, again, it really depends, right? So generally, we don't love when founders spend dollars on ads to market the WeFunder campaign. That's not how fundraising normally works. If you're spending 10 cents on ads to raise $1 in capital, we have WeFunder fees as well. That becomes a pretty expensive way to raise capital. And so I think, unlike some of our other competitors, I think we're less enthusiastic about a kind of paid media based approach to growing this industry. That being said, I think it can sometimes play a role. Like, one, if the return on ad spend is just so high, sometimes actually that can be, because there is a cost to fundraising, right? Which is the founder's time. And so, if you kind of replace the founder's time with a few $1,000s of ad spend, if the return on that ad spend is high enough, it can work. And then the other piece, I think, where it really can make sense is, if you know the LTV, or you can make some assumptions around an LTV model for customers, and then when you drop some money on ads, and then you're raising investment volume and recruiting investors, but then they also are going on to spend money with you as a customer. Then if you spend 10 cents of ad dollars and raise $1 of investment capital, but then also generate $2 in revenue, because that's now a customer who's an investor, and they're going to be a really awesome customer, and so you can get the LTV to CAC going on the equation working. Then that is, I think, really when ads for the WeFunder rounds can make a lot of sense. But certainly, I mean, I would say the majority of WeFunder founders are not spending money on ads. It's more kind of organic marketing tactics. And more conventional fundraising strategies as well, right? Like pitching angels and pitching investors. I would say, it's not like, okay, if you run a community round, don't pitch angel investors. Definitely not. Like, keep pitching angel investors. The WeFunder round should be in addition to that. Now you can also send an email blast. Now you can also put it on social media. Now you can also go on a podcast like this one and talk about the company in the round, as well as pitching kind of conventional investors, as opposed to in replacement of that.
Maybe one way to think about that is like we talked about examples of these, leveraging your business's community, but you can also much more easily leverage your personal communities when you're doing a
Totally.
crowdfund. I've done plenty of raises from friends and family over the years, and like, there's always something a little awkward about like asking your aunt to send you like a wire transfer or like emailing her a PDF of your deck, and like, But if you have an ongoing crowdfund campaign,
Right.
it's like it's much easier to be like, yeah, look, we're raising money. If you're interested, it's $100, hop in there, or to like,
Exactly.
post it on your social media, and
Yep.
like, I imagine most people would be shocked at how much money their friends and family that would be just happy to do it just because they love them, support them, believe in them, and here's $100, $200, and I
Exactly, and
imagine for some early
it's
stage
kind of
founders it would go a
nicer
long way.
to raise $1,000 from your aunt versus $50,000, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little less pressure at the family Christmas table.
One of the things that CF companies are required to have is a clear representation of all the shareholders. Um, and the way we interpret that is, okay, have a good cap table is how we look at it. Again, it can be a spreadsheet, can be a tool, whatever. um, do you see problems in that piece when companies come to you, and as you go, Wefunder goes through onboarding process? Is cap table one of the checklists that you ask for? What does that look like?
Rarely. Sometimes there can be issues that we run into. That's a part of the process I'm kind of a little less intimately familiar with. There's other people on my team that are getting more into the details of the legal filings. But I think for the most part, that's rarely a deal breaker. Maybe there's a bit of a delay there. But yeah, for the most part, I think it's not too much of an issue. It could be that, we're working with oftentimes earlier stage companies as we start to do more and more later stage companies that have raised significant capital previously. Maybe it's more of an issue there. But for the most part, I don't think that's a huge sticking point.
Got it. And yeah, I think my general advice to a lot of the founders: hey, get it ready. So eventually, these companies are going big, and you want to kind of be prepared for it. Get stuff ready. Prepare yourself so you can scale out as you go up. The other piece that we see a lot of founders come to us with challenges is their Form C filing.
Hmm.
And there are sections within Form C where they have to talk about the securities that they've offered, and there's a lot of information that is needed there. So, what kind of help does Wefunder provide the help, or does Wefunder uh, point them to some lawyers to help with those sections? What does that look like?
Yeah, we have a team that works on that with companies. We've built software to make that as easy as possible, as simple to kind of enter that information as possible, and then we have a team that works with them. And yeah, some founders, are engaging their own legal counsel as well. I think a lot of founders are launching on WeFunder. We have standard YC post money safe template. We use a Cooley convertible note. There's other kind of standard contracts that we have as well. So oftentimes, like, founders can do this without any legal fees that they incur. But yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
they want to be engaging, or they need to work with a lawyer to populate some of this information if it's harder for them to do it.
Excellent. So, what do you think is the next step for Wefunder? Where do you guys see evolve? You talked about some of the things about growing the number of user community or people repeatedly investing. Are there any other big challenges that you are thinking about?
Yeah, it's kind of a boring answer. I guess there's a slightly sexier answer that I can give as well. The boring answer is just grow. I think we now have. I read a blog recently about product market fit for RegCF, and so since these laws changed, we've seen it's just a much better product for founders, and this community round repositioning I think will really help with that, and so we're seeing it's the pushing the it's kind of chasing the boulder down the hill, as they say, versus struggling to push it up the hill. So then the question is, can we keep that growth going? Can we, obviously, our team has roughly tripled in size over the last year, and that presents a lot of challenges, right? I think it's pretty cool for me to see how uh, much we've been able to keep the integrity of our culture which is like incredibly startup-y, founder-focused culture. Highly entrepreneurial organization, like totally flat, lots of autonomy. And so it's been really cool. Like the caliber of people we've hired and the culture that we've kind of kept at Wefunder, even as we've tripled the team, has been really cool to see over the last year. But if we triple it again over the coming couple of years, it's harder, right, to keep that as you grow and kind of, where a year ago everyone on our 20-person team knew each other like really closely, those relationships just kind of start to drift apart. And so for us, like, yeah, just keeping the growth going, keeping the operations running smooth, improving the product. That's probably for me the biggest challenge of the next year. And then the second thing I would say is just, now, okay, we're talking about this community round, and there's this promise of you bring on this army of champions, loyal customers, investors, um, and but there's so much potential there. Your question was getting at this earlier, is how do we enable more founders to benefit more from that, right? So, for example, like, could there be a jobs board where WeFunder founders, like all of their army of WeFunder investors, are helping them to, recruit an engineer they're trying to hire for example? And so there are a lot of things that I think we can do on the product side to really enable founders to benefit from this really cool, unique approach to raising capital from thousands of their customers and community members. But the value that founders are getting from that right now, they have the ability to drive that themselves and to engage their community themselves. But other tools that we can build on the WeFunder side to really kind of allow them to double down on that and get more value out of that. That's probably the second kind of big kind of thing that we're working on over the coming year or so.
Do you have any plans on, speaking of growth, do you have any plans on expanding either internationally, or you mentioned earlier some stuff about, some restaurants doing raises into other verticals?
Yeah, we're expanding into the EU. They also just liberalized the laws around this recently, and so we're expanding into the EU in the coming couple of months, which is pretty exciting. Vertical wise, honestly, we're pretty industry agnostic today. So we do restaurants, breweries, coffee shops. Really cool restaurant in San Francisco, Cassava SF, just raised 400 grand on WeFunder. Really, really awesome community. Loved business there. And so, we're already in those verticals. We'll be expanding in those verticals as we're expanding in tech. But yeah, no new industry verticals coming online, but certainly EU expansion internationally.
Are there any other countries that does Asia have much of a crowdfund scene?
I don't know actually too much about the global market. I know a little more about the UK market, where I'm from. But yeah, internationally, I don't know too much about the scene. For me, like, we got our hands full on the US. Certainly now adding the EU, and it's like we got a lot of growth to step into here. So this is the focus for now.
One foot at
And
a
in the
time.
US, you can also do a Reg A plus, right?
Yep.
On WeFunder, is that true?
Yep, you can raise up to $75 million per year for Regulation A plus. Also raising from unaccredited investors. The reporting requirements, both to launch a campaign and get it approved by the SEC, will take several months, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars in financial and legal fees, and then the ongoing reporting requirements there are pretty onerous. And so,
Yep.
we've seen, I think, more of an adverse selection around Reg A in the past, where if a company can easily raise from VC firms, then historically there's been probably less appetite for them to take on that reporting requirement and those costs. I think that might change. I mean, the cap was increased from 50 million to 75 million. So, if companies are okay with those kind of compliance and reporting requirements, sometimes it's called a mini IPO.
Yep.
And so, I think over time we'll see kind of more and more like really strong companies use Regulation A. But yeah, certainly for now, WeFund has been kind of more focused on Reg CF, just from a caliber of companies perspective.
Got it. And one of the things that we see, like we have few companies now on the 212 platform that started with CF. They raised 5+ million over last couple of years,
Yeah.
and now they're getting to Reg A pluses. And one of the regulatory requirements is to have a transfer agent associated with that whole process.
Yeah.
And that's why we went and secured a TA license as well. So now
Cool.
we are a registered transfer agent, so we can be with the customer, provide the cap table solution, and help them grow as they go from CF to A plus and so on.
Love it.
Yep.
I love how you
Yeah,
guys are so good at like just building products and just like adding features, and like you were saying with the convertible note interest calculation. I feel like Wefunder, you guys you kind of invest in building the product and building out the tech yourselves versus outsourcing it. It's very noticeable in how you're running 212.
Well, thank you, Jonny. Yeah, I appreciate having you on the show. Yeah, we were a very heavy product focused team. So Rajesh and his squad do a really tremendous job. And but I think you and I and 212 and WeFunder share a lot of alignment around inclusivity, expanding access to the startup ecosystem, both from the founder and the investor level, and and being the matchmaker that you are is that's some real special sauce there. So excited to continue the relationship with WeFunder, and very much appreciated to our both of our growth ahead. And thanks for coming on the show.
Likewise, guys. Thanks for having me.
All right,
Thanks,
another
Jonny.
great episode of Startup Series with Jonny Price.